It's time to get sexy on Secular Sexuality.
Hello and welcome to Secular Sexuality Turkey Day edition. I'm Bianca, and with me today are two of my favorite guests ever, Rudy B.
Hello.
And Hanna Vaughn.
Hi.
Welcome, you guys. Thanks for joining me. We are pre-recording this episode to make sure that you guys have something to watch during the long holiday break when the ACA and all of its volunteers are going to be enjoying their own breaks. And today is a mailbag episode, which is something we've pitched pretty hard the last couple of weeks. You guys have been amazing and sent in questions via our email. A lot of you have reached out to me on my Twitter, which is also fully a valid way to do that. So if you ever have a question for Sex, let me know. And yeah, we have some amazing questions today. Before I jump in, though, I do want to give the guests a little bit of time to introduce themselves, kind of give their own little 2 cents, their spiel. So Rudy, how the hell are you?
How the hell am I? Great. I'm sipping on a chai latte. I'm just loving life. If you do not know me, if for some reason you haven't seen me on a bazillion other ACA shows yet, my name is Rudy V. I also have a YouTube channel called Xcult Baby. Xcult Baby is also like my Twitter handle and Instagram and pretty much everything else you might find me under. I'm an ex-Jehovah's Witness, now a secular humanist, atheist. I make content about my previous religious experiences, about the Jehovah's Witnesses, and about skepticism, social issues, all that good stuff.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being here again. Yes, Rudy has been guest starring all across the ACA shows, and hopefully we will be seeing a lot more of them on Secular Sexuality moving forward. And then Hanna, this is your ACA debut? Did we get you first?
It is, yeah.
Awesome. Well, welcome. Tell us a little bit about you.
Thank you so much. Well, I'm Hanna Vaughn. I just recently started a podcast / YouTube show with Ethan Michael, your friendly neighborhood atheist. We talk about sex, relationships, and dating. And while we are both atheists, it's not an atheist-focused show. And if you want to find me on basically any social media, it's Hanna Vaughn Fancy. The Vaughn is spelled V-O-N, though, a little bit shorter.
Perfect. And that usually goes live right after Secular Sexuality. So you guys start up at 9 on Thursday nights. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's a sexy Thursday.
Yeah, guys, like this is your place to be on Thursday nights. All right. Well, let's jump in then. And I know, Rudy, you had some really interesting tags here. So let's jump into your first email.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first one comes from Brianna, and it says, I am coming to the conclusion that I may be gray ace. I don't know if I have always been this way or if trauma made me this way, because I have enjoyed sex in the past and I enjoy it at certain times. Parentheses, I am definitely demisexual. Maybe you guys could discuss the gray ace spectrum. It's kind of hard to wrap my mind around, and I don't really know how to talk about it yet. And also, I am not sure how to bring it up or when to bring it up with prospective partners. Thanks for the email, Brianna.
Yeah, I love the fact that we're getting to talk about this. I know there were a couple of, we've had a couple asexual guests on. We had Miss O'Kist on a couple of weeks ago, and then again prior. But we really do love our ace community, and that oft forgotten A at in the acronym. So we do want to make sure we're platforming you guys, giving you space, educating as much as we can. I don't know, Hanna, what are your thoughts here?
Well, okay, so I know about asexuality, but can we go over what gray is, what demisexual is?
Absolutely. That's a good place to start. Thank you. So there's the asexuality spectrum, and a lot of times that can be shortened to ASPEC, right? So if someone says I'm aspec, that means that at some point along that spectrum they identify with. And that could be anything from kind of like a more demisexual thing, which is I really like sex. I am a sexual person, but usually only with people who inspire romantic feelings in me or for whom I have an emotional connection. So it's not I look at somebody and I imagine having sex with them right away. That part turns on after an emotional connection has been made. All the way down to someone who is absolutely sex repulsed, which is I do not want to have sex. Having sex is something I actively do not like, and there is no interest there for me at all. And so gray ace is kind of another term to say aspec, right? It's somewhere in that spectrum. Probably a little bit closer to the sex repulsed side, just because we're moving from demisexual, which this caller or emailer in this instance has said they are, over into the more asexual part of the spectrum. But at this point, we really don't have a lot of labels for this group of people because, as I said before, they are often forgotten or not talked about, especially in queer spaces. So we do have a dearth of language around asexuality. But yeah, when someone says they're gray ace, a lot of the time that is a signal that, you know what, maybe I'm not the most sexual person. Maybe I'm dealing with some stuff and kind of finding, where my comfort levels are with that. But I'm not sex repulsed. It's not necessarily that sex is off the table, if that makes sense.
Amazing. I tried to do some research beforehand, but that was way better for me. Thank you.
Oh yeah, for sure. And it always helps to have that kind of launch off point for the audience as well. So thank you for asking for definitions. We love that. Yeah, I don't know. I think for me, and then Hannah, you can feel free to jump in. I would love to first dispel this kind of purity test idea, which is something that comes up quite a lot, which is you can only call yourself ace or gray ace or on that spectrum if it was somehow intrinsic and not a product of experience, and you are 100% mentally healthy and physically healthy and should, quote unquote, should be a sexual being and have, decided against it for whatever reason. And that just makes it so much more difficult to have these conversations because even in Brianna's email, you're seeing, I don't know if I've always been this way or if trauma made me this way. And the implied concern there is, am I really ace, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can I really use this label for myself? And I just want to preface anything else we talk about with, you can absolutely use that label for yourself. It is descriptive of your preferences for sex. It has nothing to do with where it came from or how long you've been this way. If you do not particularly find sex interesting, then you can call yourself ace, and that is absolutely valid.
Yeah, that's what I love about learning more about how to identify these different things, because unless you know beforehand, or you could just have V explain it very wonderfully. Call V if you don't know what these are. But anyway, it's wonderful because then you can better communicate to a potential partner, this is what I'm interested in, and this is what I value. And if that changes, that's okay. That doesn't mean, I was never ace or anything. Mm-hmm. It's just how you comfortably identify and what describes your preference the most. And being able to wrap your mind around how to talk about it. I mean, I think being honest from the get-go is always the best policy. And if people don't know what these terms mean, you can just explain it or call V. Just kidding. But yeah, just being upfront with your intentions and what the expectations are going to be from the beginning is super important.
Yeah, and I know that this can also cause some concerns if you've already entered into a relationship with somebody and then they decide, oh, wait, I'm ace. Now we have to sit down and kind of have that conversation, which is something that does happen. And again, exactly as Hannah said, this is not something that is a one-time thing. You figure it out when you're 5 and then that's it for life, right? There can be periods of time where you're ace, maybe more ace than during other periods of time. You know, sometimes you've been taught your whole life that purity culture is the correct way to view the world and you're not supposed to like sex. And then you realize, oh, wait, no, this is just how I am, but this is not necessarily how everyone else is. Here is a word for that. Rudy, I know you have some experience here, and also we want to make sure that you get a chance to weigh in on this email that you read. So what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, so to address the part specifically where Brianna is asking about when to bring this up to a prospective partner, what V was saying about, maybe your partner finds out that they're ace while they're in a relationship with you, that actually happened to me and my partner. My partner identifies as gray ace, and he had never been in a sexual relationship before we got together. So that was him finding out, was like, okay, I've gone my whole life not being super interested in sex. Maybe being in a relationship will magically unlock this. And then it didn't. And it was like, oh, I guess I'm still not like super into this whole sex thing. And that was a discussion that we had to have, but it worked out just fine for both of us. There was a period of time where he was really insecure. And before he actually came out as ace, I was really insecure because I was like, why aren't we having sex that much? Is there something wrong with me? And as soon as he came out as ace, I was like, oh, okay, it's cool. It's cool. This has nothing to do with me. There's no right or wrong answer to when you should bring this up to a prospective partner. I mean, in my personal opinion, but this is just how I feel about it, I'm always like, the sooner the better. Whatever needs to be said, say it right away, because then you're not wasting anybody's time. But realistically, that's something that only you can judge on a case-by-case basis. And to follow up again on something that V was saying, gender identity, sexuality, those are things that might be fluid in some people's lives. In some people's it isn't, but in lots of people's it is. And it doesn't really matter why, but your preferences, your identity, that's all yours, no matter where it came from. So yeah, you're totally valid, Brie.
I love that.
If I could just add, Brianna saying, I don't know if I've always been this way or if it stems from trauma. Regardless, it's valid.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly.
And the fact that you can pinpoint it to potentially a traumatic experience might be a good springboard into finding a secular sex therapist to talk about with that. Because if it is from trauma and you do want to, address that and maybe make some changes, that is absolutely something you should do. I highly recommend it. But regardless of whether or not this is something that can be, quote unquote, fixed by going to a therapist, or whether this is just the way you are, as Rudy said, making sure that you're taking it on a case-by-case basis and being honest about it, because otherwise it's going to cause confusion for your partners, right? This is a nice thing for you to do for them too. So if you're like, oh, I don't feel like having sex tonight, and this is why, that will make them, I think, feel a lot better as well.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Awesome. Thank you, you guys. Hanna, Brian had a fun email. Would you like to give it a go?
Absolutely. So Brian says, I have been in my relationship for over 9 years and try to be a giving partner, although I find it difficult to take charge, as I feel some of these expectations are overly masculine. And while I have not specifically identified as gender non-binary, I also feel many of the masculine or feminine attributes seem undesirable to me. I think I want to make sure that there is no doubt of full consent while with talking and asking about what I like. But sometimes even having trouble talking about what I want with feelings I will be rejected or disliked. I think with discussions, including a therapist, I found out my girlfriend is learning to accept ideas of kink, as her thought before was more extreme examples like sadism or dominatrix type activities.
Interesting. Okay. So this seems like it's pulling in a couple different threads here. So we're talking about consent, first of all, and that's super important. We're talking about gender identity and gender roles and how comfortable you're feeling in those. We're talking about going to therapy to talk about these things, which we always like. And then we're talking about kink and kind of what that looks like. And is it always something extreme like being a dominatrix or being dommed in that way? So yeah, lots of different areas to jump into. Rudy, I'm excited to see where you'll take this.
Yeah, so with the first part at least of feeling like there are certain expectations of you in the bedroom associated with your gender, I think that that's something that everybody experiences to one degree or another. Again, this is something that me and my partner went through, sort of like, he is a cis male and I'm not a cis female, but I definitely am a lot more femme. And we discovered pretty quickly that the traditional sort of dom sub male female dynamic does not work for us. That's and that's not, totally uncommon. I think everybody has to sort of work that out for themselves, between themselves and their partner. That is totally okay and totally normal. Not everybody fits into that mold. And you don't have to identify as non-binary to not accept or to reject some of the things associated with femininity or masculinity. You don't have to be like, I am an entirely different gender than either of those. You can just say, I am what I am. I mean, you don't have to take on a label at all if you don't want to. But, there's so many words out there. Odds are you could probably find one that best describes you if the one you're using now doesn't quite fit.
I love that. Yeah, there's that fine line between deciding, oh, none of this works for me, I am something different, or, oh, there are some expectations here that I don't feel comfortable with, I'm going to reject those while maintaining the gender that I am. So yeah, I think that might be a much larger conversation to have with yourself, but no rush at this point. Do the things you like, don't do the things you don't like, and make sure you're communicating with your partner. I'm interested in the kink aspect of this and kind of communicating what that looks like, especially in the area of consent, because a lot of people seem to have this idea that somehow BDSM and kink are less consensual than non-kink, or we call it sometimes vanilla sex, right? And this idea that, oh, if I'm engaging with my partner in a way that is anything other than the expected sexual relationship, then somehow there's that consent concern. And while I always want to say, yes, consent is important across the board, enthusiasm, total buy-in, all of that, checking in while sex is happening, it's a lot easier to do that a lot of times in a BDSM situation, and a lot more necessary. And so think about it in terms of if you only ever think about sex in this very purity culture, kind of sub-dom, male, female, like missionary position style sex, there isn't a lot of communication happening there, right? And there's a lot of expectation placed on both partners that they know what's going to happen. They've already agreed to it. Like there's not going to be any conversation around, okay, well, how does this feel for you? And okay, well, can I do this now? Is that comfortable? Or hey, I want to try something brand new. Can we do this instead tonight? A lot of the time that conversational piece just isn't there. And so it actually makes it a lot more likely that that kind of sexual encounter will be non-consensual. Whereas if you are engaging healthily in a BDSM or kinky type of sexual relationship, that communication needs to be always on point, right? You need to communicate before you start. You need to make sure you have safe words. You need to make sure that you're checking in during sex, and then after sex, talking about, aftercare and cuddling and, did that work? Do you want to try something different next time? Was there anything that was triggering for you? And so that conversation piece is kind of needs to be built into a kink relationship in a way that actually protects you from a lot of non-consensual, like accidental non-consent, because you're talking about it every step of the way. So it doesn't have to be something, huge. Like, you don't have to come out in full leather gear necessarily your first night or ever if you don't want to. But as you're kind of playing around in this space, making sure you are being conversational, treating it like the important conversation that it is. And that will safeguard against a lot of those concerns around consent.
Awesome.
Hanna.
Yeah. No, you both said that all so wonderfully. What Rudy was saying about how you can identify your gender one way isn't going to negate the way the role you play in bed, essentially. If you're a man and you're more submissive in bed, that doesn't make you any less of a man. I mean, if you feel like you might be non-binary because of that, I mean, that's something definitely you should explore. But the role you play sexually isn't going to negate your gender, essentially. But it's so case by case, I suppose. The thing about kink and exploring BDSM, it's such a broad spectrum, and I think that Brian's already on the right track with going to a therapist and being open to communication and really being concerned about consent. Also, I just want to point out that it's really easy to kind of forget about your own consent and to go along with things you're not comfortable with for the sake of your partner. So I always keep that in the back of your mind as well while you're trying to figure out what your partner's comfortable with. Always make sure that you are being honest with yourself and what you want. And having that conversation with your partner, I mean, you're already on the right track. I mean, wanting to see a therapist, or if you already are seeing a therapist and just talking with your partner and exploring new ideas, that's amazing.
Yeah, I love that piece of making sure that you're getting your own consent too and keeping that forefront as well. Awesome.
Yeah, that's something that actually me and my partner had to work out, because both of us, at least at the beginning of our relationship to varying degrees, had problems advocating for ourselves, because we both really wanted to be doing everything we could for the other person. And something that has really helped both of us was keeping in mind, hey, I don't want to do something to my partner that they aren't fully consenting to, and I'm sure they want the same from me. Like, keeping in mind that your partner is not a monster, your partner is not totally selfish, and is not, like, just keeping in mind your partner cares about you and cares about your consent. And if you're not advocating for yourself, then you are actually doing them a disservice. If you're the kind of person that puts your partner's needs ahead, framing it that way in your mind might be a good way to remember that advocating for yourself is not just for you. Because if your partner gives a shit about you, they will want you to advocate for yourself.
I love that. All right. I got an email from someone named Chelsea that I'd love to read and then get your guys' thoughts on. Chelsea says, I'm having a lot of trouble understanding how people can feel strongly they are male or female, because I realized I don't experience that. I don't have a strong urge that I'm female in any way other than I have a vagina, ovaries, uterus, and breasts. I feel like if I woke up one day and my brain was in a quote unquote male body, then I would be male. I'm trying to understand, does this mean I'm non-binary? For what it's worth, I've never stuck closely to gender norms and have always worn both men's and women's clothes. I have had long curly hair at times and short cropped hair at others, etc. When I was younger, I had times when I was mistaken for a boy and it never bothered me. So the too long don't read version, which he or they, if it turns out to be they, graciously responded was, I don't have strong feelings about being a woman, even though I'm biologically female. Does that mean I'm NB? So thoughts?
I think only Chelsea can really identify that. I mean, we can't really say, yep, sounds like you fit the criteria for non-binary.
We are not diagnosing. Yep. Yeah, no. I will say, I think that I will say, at least from what I have understood from conversations about gender with many cis people that I know, is that is a lot of cis people's experience of not having a strong sense of gender because that's never really been a question before, I guess. At least that's my understanding. From conversations that I have is like, well, this is what I have, and I've never questioned it, never pushed the envelope. I've never felt like I belong somewhere else, or I belong outside of this definition. So guess I'm a woman. Like that at least that's my understanding. And I will say I certainly don't relate to that as an NB person. I don't relate to that at all, because my conceptions of who I am, the way I see myself, the way I feel, the way I wish to be perceived are all over the place. And sometimes that falls into a more feminine spectrum, but sometimes it really doesn't. So I guess all I can say is this is what I've heard from cis people, and my own experience does not relate to yours at all as an NB person. But that doesn't necessarily mean anything. I mean, like Hanna said right off the bat, this is not something we can just tell you what you are or are not. That is totally something for you to figure out. And maybe having those conversations about gender with people of various genders is like, how do you perceive yourself? What to you makes you feel this way, that this is how you identify? Having those conversations and thinking about that for yourself might help bring you some clarity.
Yeah, as a cis person, I guess, I've been like, hey, I'm a woman, and I've never had anyone go, but are you sure? So it's not really something. And then being exposed to, different genders and identities growing up, I actually have had this thought, just like Chelsea, like, wait, but like sometimes I feel masculine. Does that make me non-binary? And it's like, well, I don't think so. And I mean, that's just kind of where it's at. I mean, I feel comfortable identifying as a woman, so that's how I identify. I don't think it takes a certain amount of criteria or anything. It's just kind of what you're comfortable with.
I love that. This is really cool for me, because I feel like I'm kind of gonna be in the middle of both of your responses here, which is I'm always advocating for, even if you are cis, like, think about it and kind of do what Hanna has done and say, well, okay, well, does this mean I like X, Y, and Z, or sometimes I feel this way? Does that mean that I am another gender? Because it's always good to know for sure, to check in with yourself, to have that conversation. And a lot of people, most people, statistically at least, will decide, no, actually, this is my gender, and this is cool, and moving on. Next question, please. And then there will be some people like me and like Rudy who kind of have that thought process, and that leads to a whole other conversation, right? And that can be very exciting. It can also be kind of scary and exhausting. So it's only a conversation that you should have with yourself when you're ready. Nobody is tapping their watch and saying, when's Chelsea going to figure this out? You do this on your time, at your speed. There is also the possibility, and I want to acknowledge that, yes, a lot of cis people have this thought and then are like, I've never really thought about it. I don't really have strong ties to my gender. So I guess I'm cis. Another option, and going back to representing those oft overlooked A's, is that you might be agender, which is also a possibility. And that might mean that you simply don't have a strong tie to gender at all, and you really don't care about it. And you don't feel particularly like a woman, but also don't feel particularly non-binary or particularly masculine. Like, it could just be that that's your experience. And that is also something to look at if you are curious about that label. But all of that said, I want to stress that this is not an ontological question. We are not talking about something that exists outside of yourself as a concrete thing that you become. Right? This is a label that is descriptive of you. that is used for your benefit. So if you feel like saying I am NB because this better represents me to the world and I want to be seen in this way, congrats, you're NB. Go for it. Nobody's going to be telling you, again, you don't meet that criteria. But also, it's not a requirement. You don't have to take that label on. Even if you are feeling like your experience from other cis women is different, but you feel like you still prefer to be a cis woman, then that is what you should be. And it's a difficult shift to accommodate culturally when we start finding new words for things and building out that lexicon and saying, hey, guess what? There are more ways to describe yourself than you thought. And of course, the natural, question that comes next is, okay, well, this is how I've been describing myself. Is there a better word? Should I be describing myself as something else? And we need to get out of the mindset of should, right? Could you? Absolutely. Should you? Not really. It's up to you. So I'd say have this conversation with yourself. Maybe engage with some non-cis people, either online or in your friend group, and get their take. But ultimately, this is going to come down to whether or not the label serves you. And if it does, we're excited to have you. And if it doesn't, then, kudos, you have found who you are, and, have at it.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah. Better understanding yourself is always a good thing.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. There's no downside to that, I don't think. Right. Rudy, you've got another one here.
I do, from a person who is calling themselves Llama, which I love. I love that. I'm Team Alpaca though, just saying. I'm a demisexual, panromantic person. Hey, same. But I've been in a cis heteronormative monogamous relationship for the past 11 years. Also same, but 3 years. I still fly my pride flags and recognize that I could potentially love anybody. Yet I can easily pass as a normal, straight male. Is it wrong of me to still identify as queer? I don't want to steal anybody's identity, and I don't want to misappropriate LGBTQIA plus people's culture. I guess I just don't know if I'm an imposter trying to steal the rainbow flag or just trying to find my color underneath it. Llama, I feel like we're all gonna just say, no, dude, you do you, but I'll let everybody else talk now.
Well, spoiler alert, I think that's going to be the direction this goes.
Yeah.
But also, can I just say, beautifully written. That last line was it touched me.
Mm-hmm. We're all trying to find our colors.
Right? I love it. Hannah, what are your thoughts here?
No, dude, you do you. Exactly. That's what I was going to say. No, as someone who has been mostly in cis het relationships my whole life, I still have always known that I'm bisexual. Not always, but from a very young age. And I have struggled with this before. And you're not stealing anyone's identity. It's your identity. If that's what you say it is and how you feel. No, we're happy to have you. I don't know what else to say. I mean, I so respect that people wonder and question this.
Yeah.
It's just a respectful thing to not want to be misrepresenting someone's culture but at the same time, no, you're good. You're good.
Yes, I agree. And as much as I hesitate to make one-to-one comparisons between things like being queer and, say, a more racial minority situation, I can kind of see a distinction here that is worth bringing up, I think, which is if you are multiracial and you don't necessarily look like somebody of any one of those races, then you are going to probably find yourself in a situation where you're asking, okay, can I call myself Black? Can I call myself Mexican, right? Is this something I can do even though I don't meet XYZ criteria? And when someone thinks about that in their head, I'm not the first thing they jump to. And I don't know. I'm curious to hear, Rudy, I know you raised your hand there. I'm curious to hear if you think this is like an apt comparison, because I feel like there's a lot of like in that situation, I would say, yes, you are what you are, and the spectrum is richer because you are in it. But I'm curious what your thoughts are here.
No, I absolutely agree with that comparison. It's a comparison I have made myself before. I mean, I am biracial. I have in fact, I have my best friend is also multiracial, and she is white passing, but she does not identify as white. And people, it's weird because I live in a really small town, so people are always saying like super racist stuff to her and expecting her to like agree, and she's like, no, no, no,
Oh,
no.
no.
But no, I mean, race is also largely just a social construct
Mhm.
in exactly the same way. It's like we take something like where people are from or how dark their skin is or specific facial features and things like that, and we call that a race, but it's not like a real physical thing that exists.
Mhm.
Whichever one that you are part of, that you identify with, that's you. And nobody's gonna like nobody can take that away from you. Nobody can question that from you. And in exactly the same way, when we're talking about a gender or romantic or sexual identity, that is it's all the same stuff. It's all words that we use to describe people. If this describes you, then it's you. Like you don't have to feel like you're stealing it just because you pass. It doesn't matter at all. I mean, it's not even part of the equation. It's whether or not something applies to you is up to your own description of yourself. Like I've been in your shoes. I Before I started identifying as gender fluid, I was definitely like gender questioning for a long time, but I had a binary trans best friend, and being around him and seeing his very different struggle with gender from mine made me feel like, oh, I can't take on that label. I I don't belong taking this label. I'm not going through the same struggle. But the label has nothing to do with struggle. The label has nothing to do with the way other people perceive you. It's the way that you perceive you. It's the way that you describe you. That's all that matters in this label.
Yeah,
I
we
love
don't
that.
gatekeep in this house.
What'd you say?
We don't gatekeep in this house.
No gatekeeping.
Exactly. And I think the last thing I would say on this one, and then anyone else feel free to jump in and round this out, is I want to make sure that we're also kind of, Rudy, you brought up your friend who people would say terrible racist things to, expecting them to go along with it. And I'm sure your friend is put in a position where it can be very uncomfortable to say, well, no, actually, that's not
Actually,
funny,
no,
or
because
that's
she's a real
stupid.
loudmouth.
Good,
She's a
good,
real
even
loudmouth.
better.
She will straight up say, "Nope, you're racist." That's
I
stupid.
love that. And you can do the same thing with this, right? Like if you pass, right? If somebody comes up to you thinking that you are a, cis het dude, just, one of the bros, I guess, and start saying something queer phobic, you have that opportunity to kind of be that sleeper, and be like, just kidding. Actually, this is me. And actually, here, let me show you my allyship as well, right? And so there is an opportunity here for you, not only to find this community yourself, but I found for me, I also pass if I want to. Sometimes when I don't want to, which is frustrating. And I find myself in similar situations where I'm like, hey, you think that you can talk to me as a, one of the girls, and I'll talk to you about it, but I'm going to give you a perspective you did not expect. So it's an opportunity for you as well.
Yeah, there's something magical about the passing privilege of, people get to know you, people who might be queerphobic, and they get to know you as this whole well-rounded, wonderful person, and then they say something not okay. And you're like, psych, I'm queer. And
Mhm.
then their mind is blown. They're like, wait,
Yep.
but I like you. So it's
Yeah,
wonderful.
that is a powerful feeling.
Mhm.
It feels like somebody just asked for the manager and you get to say, actually, I'm the manager.
Yes. Oh
What's
my
up?
goodness.
Absolutely.
I love that analogy. That is perfect.
Yeah.
I hope that helps, Llama. And thank you for being conscientious about it. Because, yeah, like Hannah said, this is a good place to come from. And now we like to give it back and say, yes, you are valid. You are here. Welcome to the community. And we're happy to have you. Hannah, I know Allison had a question that you were interested in as well.
Yes, Allison said, I am currently in a quote unquote friends with benefits kind of relationship. The sex I have is amazing and I have mind blowing orgasms. Good for you, Allison. I have had sexual trauma in the past and get triggered by nightmares, intruding thoughts, etc. Once I'm triggered, my sex drive disappears and I have trouble getting it back. I'm wondering what I can do to get myself back into the mood and what my partner can do to help. Go ahead, guys.
Therapy. Therapy.
Yes. Yes.
Sorry, you guys wanted to.
Oh yeah. Apart from the very apt call to, get thee to a therapist, I think another thing would be to be gentle with yourself and honest with your partner. Right. It can be kind of weird to be in that friends with benefits space because it is, there's the friendship aspect, which hopefully is strong enough by itself. But there's also that I've been in that space where it's like, you don't necessarily want to know like my entire sexual history. Like we're not at that level emotionally. But, this is something that is pressing and something that we need to talk about. So how do I bring this up? And I'd say lean on that friends part with this person, right? If you cannot talk with them about this, then they're not someone that you should be friends with or, putting yourself in this vulnerable position with. So if you can trust them enough to have sex with them, then you can hopefully trust them enough to be able to communicate about having sex. And so I'd say lean on that friends piece, right? Say, hey, I know that we have sex. I love it. It's amazing. Like I literally gush about it to other people. I also have this one thing that I want to make sure that you know, so that if I'm ever not in the mood, you understand why. And it's not about you, right? It's not, you didn't do anything. This is something that comes with the territory, right? This is who I am. And just making sure that they know that it's not them and that you guys are fine. And then maybe, put them in that position to be able to help you if they want to, right? If they want to be supportive and they want to go beyond just letting you have your space and actually enter into that place with you and help you, it would be very helpful for them to know kind of what's going on. So as far as getting yourself back into the mood, I would say I'm a little bit concerned about the phrasing of that, just because it feels like you might be putting pressure on yourself, or your partner may be putting pressure on you to like get over it and get back to having the sex. And I don't think that's necessarily what we want to focus on here, right? What we want to focus on is, what makes you feel better and at what pace, right? This isn't something you need to get over and get back to, what your partner wants. This is something that where if you need to say, hey, for a week, I need to go and do something else, I'm sorry, then them's the breaks. That's what happens. And your partner has to be okay with that. So I'd say there are certainly techniques that I'm sure exist. I cannot speak to them as I am not a sex therapist. So another reason to get to therapy, to, calm down that triggered mindset, to get back into the mood. But as somebody who does have triggers and who isn't always in the mood, I'd say communicate, tell your partner where you're at, and then do what you need to do to feel better. And if that's not have sex for a week, then it's not have sex for a week. And that's just that.
Yeah, I fully agree with all of that. I feel like there shouldn't be any priority on getting back in the mood. It should be getting back to a stable mindset. Like Of course, mind-blowing orgasms would probably help, but if that is not available because you are not in the headspace for sex,
Mhm.
I mean, your priority should just be able to get back to being good. And I have not had to deal in my life with sexual triggers, but I have friends that have triggers that I have done my best to support. And I have been in a situation where I needed somebody to support me. And the best thing that I have personally found for that is just asking that person, what can I do to support you right now? Do you want to be comforted? Do you just need to vent? Do you want to forget about this and be distracted? Do you want to just have some comfort food? Do you want to watch your favorite show? Like, and the way that maybe you can support your friend doing that is trying to think of, when you're not in that headspace, what is stuff that brings me instant relief, instant comfort, instant calm, instant peace, instant joy, and just make like a list or something as a quick reference of, okay, this is something that might help me get back into my happy place when I'm not in that place. Or just figure out what you want for yourself at that time and advocate, if you can. Advocate at the time, what I need right now is to be distracted, what I need right now is comfort, whatever it is. Try to do your best to make that clear ahead of time if you can, or at the time if you can.
Mhm.
And of course, have this conversation with your friend when the trigger is not happening. Make it clear that this is something that you are thinking about, and something that you're concerned about, and something that you may need their platonic support with.
Mhm.
That is that is so important in this, is just communicating that you need this support from your partner.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
What V was saying about the priority being just getting back into the right headspace as opposed to getting back into the mood. I understand how frustrating it can be. And sometimes you're just like, oh my gosh, I want to get back and get off so badly. It's definitely not the priority in that moment. When you're triggered, you need to get through it and feel it and not fight it. Not necessarily, full blown put yourself in a panic attack, but just be mindful of what's going on with you and not trying to push past it. That can make it so much worse. And if you're in a place where you can get therapy, absolutely. It's really hard to give advice on how you can get back in the mood when I don't know what your triggers are and what you're comfortable with. I mean, definitely putting the brakes on as soon as you start to feel that way, and communicating to your partner. Hopefully they're the type of partner who's going to listen. And I think patience is probably the most important thing they can give you.
Yeah, I fully agree. And I think, Hannah, you hit on something really important, which is trying to get back in the mood and pushing yourself in that way can just make it worse. And
Yeah.
you want to make sure that you're only ever doing things that help you, never at the expense of your own mental health. Also, I just want to make sure that we're clear here. Like, I understand it can make it a little bit more complicated if it's a friends with benefits type of relationship, but honestly, this is a ground rule for anybody who gets to be in your life. Like, regardless of the relationship type, if they can't handle the fact that you have these particular needs and you function in this way and not respect that, then they don't deserve to be in your life. And so I understand there might be a little bit of nuance in how you communicate this to somebody who has agreed to having sex with you, but maybe not the relationship element. But this is just something that your friend should know as a friend if they're going to be put in a situation where they're going to be interacting with you in this space. And they should be able and willing and ready to accommodate that. So,
Yeah.
all right, we have one more, and this went so quick, you guys. I'm so like, I mean, I love Christy. I love Christy to death. Christy, you're my fave. But also, like, I could do this every day. Like, you guys are awesome. All right. So, last email is from Hayden, and I know a little bit about Hayden. So, for context, Hayden is also NB. And they write, how do I explain being NB to my daughter? She's only 2, but as she gets older, I want to make sure she understands, especially since I am keeping dad as my title because she's used to that. So that's the email. How do you explain being NB or the concept of non-binariness to your kid? Ugh, sorry about that. That's very loud. Even if you are keeping maybe a more traditional parental label.
I mean, I'm trying to figure that out right now with my niece. She's 3 in July and already used to calling me Auntie Rachel, which we have transitioned to Auntie Rudy. But even then, I'm like, but can we lose Auntie? Can we lose that bit? Or,
Right.
or I mean, I would even prefer Uncle. I mean, I don't. That's something that I am currently struggling with, is trying to sort of introduce that concept to somebody so young. It's like, on one hand, they don't have hardly any concept of these much more complex ideas, but on the other hand, it might be a lot easier for them to just sort of get that into their heads at such a young age. But then that could also be considered indoctrination. I don't know. It's tricky. I think. I will say.
When I grew up, my grandpa on my mom's side, we called him Opa Cookie. Like, that was his name, Opa Cookie.
That's so cute.
And like, in my head as a kid, I was like, that is that person. Why is there Cookie involved in this? Like, I don't know. That's just that's his name, right? And so I think a lot of that, yeah, like if you wanted to say Uncle Rudy, like, that is just going to be something that kid absorbs and becomes natural to them. So.
Yeah.
So,
but
it's something. Go ahead.
But as for the actual like concept, I'm not sure how you would really tell that to a little kid. But I will say that for just sort of learning that I had changed my name was literally just a matter of repetition. The people around her were like, be good for Rudy. Rudy's going to babysit you. And every time she would say Rachel, I would just correct her. And I would say Rudy. And she would say, Rudy, can I have milk instead? Or whatever it was that she was doing. And after a while, it stuck. And I think that really, for teaching a little kid anything, there's probably no better way than with repetition. So maybe introduce your pronouns in that sort of way. That might be better. I don't know if that's necessarily the concept of non-binary, but it is the language, and maybe that's a stepping stone to when she's a little older and can grasp these concepts, explaining that further.
Yeah, so I've been working with kids for a long time and currently do. And from my experience, kids are pretty accepting. I mean, I've, working in schools, I've never been really allowed to talk about things that weren't super traditional. But I have overheard these conversations with kids. I actually overheard one of my third graders years back talking about trans people, and her just saying, sometimes this is how someone feels and this is what they do. And the kids around her went, okay, they're pretty accepting at a young age, especially 2, if you just, with the repetition and just kind of explain, oh, this is that and this is this, they're kind of like, okay. And as they get older, you have to be careful with what's developmentally appropriate for them to understand. But kids can be pretty accepting if just you tell them this is how it is and they're like, okay. I mean, they're obviously going to question it as they get older, and just being honest and also, like I said, developmentally appropriate.
Yeah, I think I'm of 2 minds here, and I want to make 2 points. The first one is explaining being non-binary to a kid will necessitate shifting how they think about gender in general and how they function in society, right? So there is going to be a little bit of pushback from, her friends, from other members of the family, and just the way they think about gender as intrinsic. Whereas if you talk about gender more in a descriptive way, that automatically opens the door to a lot of conversations that otherwise would be very hard to have, because it no longer becomes when do I give my kid a biology textbook and tell them to read it cover to cover? It becomes a conversation about, respecting other people and believing them when they tell you who they are, and teaching it as a matter of courtesy, if nothing else. Beyond that, certainly going into the biology of how sex is bimodal and not binary, and how neurology and neuroscience comes into play. All of that is useful, but not necessarily something you need to worry about right now. Right now, worry about instilling that sense of respect and openness in your kid, and just kind of modeling that for her, because kids learn by example. And if you use they, them pronouns for someone or for yourself, that's going to signal to her that it's okay to do that, and that that's the correct thing to do. In terms of keeping the dad title, I'm kind of in the similar space where I'm looking at first of all, I am looking at siblings getting married and having kids eventually in the near future. And I'm wondering how I can spin it to make Uncle V a joke that everyone buys into, but actually is just like my preferred label there. So that's a conversation I'll be having with my own family. But in terms of, I know my one sibling, I had this conversation with her, and she was like, "Are you still my sister then? Like, you've been my sister. Is that still who you are?" And I kind of came to the conclusion that I am absolutely okay still being a sister, because to me, that's more of a role than it is an identity. I filled the role of oldest sister for my siblings, and that is a very specific role that has a lot of intrinsic meaning behind it, and expectations that I met, that I fulfilled, and I'm proud of how I filled that role of oldest sister. And maybe that's not how I would introduce myself to somebody now. And if by some divine miracle my mom got pregnant again, I probably wouldn't use sister to describe my relationship with that newest member of the family. But historically, that is what I have been, and I'm okay in that tense space of filling more than one role. So I think that dad, even though we are moving away from gender roles and gender stereotypes, being a dad is a very specific role, right? If I were a parent, I think I'd be more of a dad than I would be a mom, just because there is a role there. And if that's your role, then you absolutely have a right to use that title, no matter what your pronouns are.
I'm in exactly the same boat as far as familial roles. I call myself my cat's mom. I still think of myself as as the sister to my siblings, but I don't think of myself as the daughter to my parents.
Yes, that is such a strange distinction, but absolutely on point for me as well.
Yeah, it's kind of strange to explain it, but it's that's the role that I feel like I fill in some cases and not in others. It's way more of a role thing than it is a gender thing in my head.
Mm-hmm.
I've wondered this before, and that totally just gave me a lot to think about, because I never really thought about it that way, but it absolutely makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I think we're just in this mindset of prescriptivism, right? We think, okay, well, you need to use this word if you are X, Y, and Z. And I guess there's a little bit of chaos there, right? To say, no, that's not how that works. But yeah, if you are her dad, that means a lot more than just, your gender, right? That is not something that people think about necessarily when they think of someone's dad. Think of your dad. Do you think about his chromosomes first? No, you think about, all of the things that you and your dad did. And I think you can still 100% be that for your kid if that's the role you want to keep. But going back to what Rudy said in the beginning, if that is not the role you want to keep, if that title doesn't work for you, keeping it around just because she's used to it isn't necessarily required, right? Due to repetition and just initiating these changes now while she's only 2, it might take a little bit of work, but you can certainly change that title if that's something that you feel comfortable with. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Well, thank you everyone who wrote in. This was some of the best questions I think we've gotten for a mailbag episode yet, and we barely made a dent. You guys sent in a lot, so we have a lot for the next one as well. If you want to send in your question and get it answered on a mailbag episode like this, feel free to reach out to our Twitter at Secular Sex or email us at sex@atheist-community.org. And we will gather all of your questions and then answer them to the best of our ability, understanding, of course, that we are all strangers on the internet, not to each other, but to most of y'all. You know us through the show, and you know that we are not therapists. We are not in any way qualified to give, advice around mental health or parenting other than relating to you, other than saying, hey, here's what I do in your shoes, and hopefully validating you and letting you walk away feeling a little bit more like you. Rudy, Hanna, this was a little bit of a shorter episode because we didn't have any call-ins today. But I do want to thank you guys so much for being a part of this holiday episode, for making sure that anyone who maybe can't be with family this week, or, whether that's for COVID or because they identify in a way that the rest of the family has decided is not for them. Thanks for being here for everybody with me.
Thank you so much for having me. This is a lot of fun.
Thanks for letting us be that for somebody. So, yeah.
All right. Well, hopefully I will see you both back here at some point. Hint, hint, wink, wink. And in the meantime, ideally not around the feast table, but, if you need to go excuse yourself for a minute, I want to encourage everybody out there to go ahead and give yourself a big old orgasm. Or, better yet, give somebody else one.